An eyewitness in this case told Lullies Keymolen's family he'll never get the sound of her screams out of his head. As the young mother's harrowing final moments haunt so many, family agonizes over how it got to this point and what more could have been done to get her out of the relationship that prosecutors say ended her life.
A man stepped outside for a cigarette at 3:40 a.m. on August 27, 2020. What he witnessed in those next few minutes would haunt him for the rest of his life. Welcome back to Shadows of Crime. I'm your host, and if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we dive deep into cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about human nature. The screams pierced through the quiet Kent, Washington night. A woman's voice, desperate, pleading for help. The witness looked across the street and saw something that made his blood run cold. A young woman lying in the bushes while a man stood over her, his fists connecting with her body again and again. Just hours earlier, that same woman had been celebrating, laughing, surrounded by family who loved her. It was her 23rd birthday, August 26th, and Lourdes Lullies, Keymolen, had spent the evening being wined and dined at an upscale Seattle hotel. She'd returned to her parents' home, where they uncorked a bottle of Patron tequila, toasting to another year of life, another year of dreams, for this young mother who had so much to live for. But now, in the darkness of that early morning, those dreams were being shattered with each brutal blow. The witness watched as Lourdes somehow found the strength to stand up from those bushes. She was hurt, bleeding, but she was alive. And that's when her boyfriend, Cordante Walker, made a decision that would change everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your state or country in the comments. I love connecting with our Shadows of Crime family from around the world. But first, let me tell you what happened next. Because what this witness saw will make you understand why some betrayals cut deeper than any weapon ever could. Before we witness the horror of that August night, you need to understand who Lord Keymolen really was. Because the media headlines can never capture the full picture of a life cut short. Born in Kirkland, Washington, Lourdes grew up in a family that understood the meaning of sticking together. Her friends and family had one word that came up over and over when describing her: genuine. This wasn't someone putting on an act for social media or trying to impress anyone. At Lindbergh High School in Renton, she graduated in 2016 with big dreams swirling in her head. While other teenagers were still figuring out what they wanted for lunch, Lourdes was already mapping out two completely different career paths. She'd spend hours researching veterinary programs, fascinated by the idea of healing animals and giving them a voice they couldn't give themselves. But then she'd flip to cooking shows and culinary websites, equally passionate about the art of creating something beautiful and delicious from simple ingredients. Her brother Gabriel knew this side of her better than anyone. They shared more than just DNA. They shared two dogs, Rambo and Lady, who became the center of countless family stories. Lourdes would spend entire afternoons at the river near their family home, swimming and laughing with those dogs never far from her side. She had this thing about sneakers, too, not just buying them, but really collecting them, studying the craftsmanship and design like other people collected art. But here's what made Lourdes different from so many people her age. She wasn't waiting for life to happen to her. By the time she was working at that upscale liquor store in Tukwila, she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Every shift, every paycheck was part of a bigger plan. She wasn't just working to get by, she was building something. What none of them knew was that behind that infectious smile and those big dreams, Lourdes was about to make a decision that would put her directly in the path of someone whose love would become her greatest danger. In 2012, when Lourdes was just a teenager, she met someone who would change the entire trajectory of her life. Mike Smith wasn't just another high school boyfriend. He became what he would later describe as her first love. And more importantly, she became his. "We were inseparable," Mike would recall years later, his voice still carrying the weight of those memories. And when you look at their relationship, you understand what he meant. This wasn't puppy love or teenage infatuation. Lourdes and Mike built something real together, something that lasted through the chaos of growing up. through the pressure of figuring out who they were as individuals while being part of something bigger as a couple. For 7 years, they navigated life side by side. 7 years of inside jokes, shared dreams, and the kind of deep connection that made other people envious. Mike saw Lourdes in ways that nobody else did. He knew about her quiet moments of doubt and her fierce determination when she set her mind to something. Then in 2018, everything shifted in the most beautiful way possible. Mylea was born. And suddenly, Lourdes wasn't just Mike's girlfriend or Gabrielle's sister or her parents' daughter. She was a mother. And that role transformed her in ways that surprised even the people who knew her best. Mike watched this transformation happen in real time. She loved that little girl to death, he would say later. She literally did anything and everything she could to make sure she had a roof over her head. But it was more than just providing shelter or food. Lourdes approached motherhood the same way she approached everything else in her life, with complete dedication and an attention to detail that bordered on perfectionism. She would spend hours just watching Mylea sleep, memorizing every tiny feature, every little sound she made. Friends would find her scrolling through hundreds of photos on her phone, each one capturing a different expression, a different moment she never wanted to forget. But here's where life gets complicated in ways that nobody prepares you for. In 2019, despite all that love, despite 7 years together and a beautiful daughter they both adored, Lourdes and Mike made the difficult decision to end their romantic relationship. It wasn't about lack of love. Sometimes people grow in different directions, and the healthiest thing they can do is acknowledge that reality. What made their situation remarkable was how they handled it. Even after their breakup, they remained connected through Mylea, working together to make sure their daughter felt loved and secure. Neither of them could have predicted that this decision would put Lourdes on a path towards someone whose version of love would be deadly. After her relationship with Mike ended, Lourdes found herself in unfamiliar territory. For the first time since she was a teenager, she was single, navigating the world of dating as a young mother with responsibilities and dreams that extended far beyond herself. That's when Cordante Walker entered her life. At first, like most toxic relationships, it probably felt like a breath of fresh air. Walker was charming, attentive, and seemed to understand what Lourdes needed after the emotional complexity of ending a 7-year relationship. He made her laugh, made her feel desired, and most importantly, he seemed to accept that Mylea was part of the package. But charm can be a mask, and Walker's true nature began revealing itself in ways that started small and escalated gradually, the classic pattern that makes it so difficult for victims to recognize what's happening until they're already trapped. It began with his mouth. Walker had a way with words, but not the kind that built people up. He would call Lourdes every name in the book, according to her mother Fabi, who watched her daughter's confidence slowly erode under the constant verbal assault. These weren't arguments or disagreements. This was systematic degradation designed to make Lourdes question her own worth. Then came the control tactics. Walker would throw Lourdes's belongings out of their shared apartment in Kent, along with Mylea's things. Picture that for a moment. A grown man so consumed with rage that he would throw a toddler's toys and clothes out the door. The message was clear. You exist here at my discretion, and that can change at any moment. Fabi found herself making repeated trips to rescue her daughter from situations that were becoming increasingly volatile. A couple times I had to go pick her up because he kicked her out, she would later recall. But here's what made the situation even more heartbreaking. Lourdes kept going back. This wasn't stupidity or weakness. This was hope. Lourdes had spent her entire life seeing the good in people, believing that love could transform even the most damaged individuals. She wanted to continue to try to see the good in this man, her mother explained, and you can hear the frustration and helplessness in those words. What the family didn't know at the time was that Walker's behavior wasn't new or unique to his relationship with Lourdes. In 2018, he had been served a protective order related to a separate incident where multiple witnesses saw him punching a different woman in a Starbucks parking lot. This wasn't a man who lost control once. This was a pattern, a way of being in the world that treated women as objects to be dominated rather than people to be loved. But Lourdes didn't have access to that information. She only saw the man who could be sweet and loving when he wanted to be, the man who promised to change, who probably cried and apologized after each incident, swearing it would never happen again. She had no way of knowing that she was dating someone whose previous relationship had required legal intervention to protect another woman's safety. August 26, 2020 started like a fairy tale. Lourdes woke up on her 23rd birthday with no idea that she had exactly 27 hours left to live. Walker seemed determined to make this birthday special. He took her to a swanky Seattle hotel, the kind of place where the staff remembers your name and the wine list costs more than most people's grocery budget. For someone who had been enduring months of verbal abuse and emotional manipulation, this gesture must have felt like proof that the man she loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath all that anger. They spent the afternoon being wined and dined, probably taking photos, laughing, acting like any other couple celebrating a milestone. Lourdes was radiant. Friends would later say she seemed genuinely happy that day, more relaxed than she'd been in months. Maybe she thought they were turning a corner. Maybe she believed this was Walker's way of apologizing for all the times he'd thrown her belongings out, all the names he'd called her, all the nights she'd had to call her mother for rescue. After the hotel, they made their way to her parents' home, where the celebration continued in a more intimate setting. This was Lourdes in her element, surrounded by family who adored her, in the house where she'd grown up feeling safe and loved. They uncorked a bottle of Patron tequila, the good stuff, and settled in for what should have been hours of storytelling, laughter, and the kind of birthday memories that get retold for decades. Her family would later remember every detail of those final hours together. The way Lourdes smiled when they toasted to her future, how she talked about her plans, her dreams for Milea, the life she was building one careful step at a time. Walker seemed relaxed too, playing the role of the devoted boyfriend, probably charming her parents the way he'd charmed their daughter. But as the night wore on and the tequila flowed, something shifted. Maybe it was the alcohol lowering inhibitions. Maybe it was the stress of maintaining a facade for hours. Maybe it was simply that Walker couldn't sustain the act of being a decent human being for an entire day. As they prepared to leave her parents' house in the early morning hours of August 27th, heading back to their shared apartment in Kent, the last thing Lourdes's family saw was their daughter walking out the door with the man who would kill her before the sun came up. The drive back to their Kent apartment should have taken about 20 minutes. It was the kind of late-night journey that couples make all the time. Tired, maybe a little buzzed from celebrating, ready to fall into bed and sleep off a good day. But somewhere between her parents' driveway and their destination, everything went wrong. According to Walker's later statements to police, they began arguing during the drive. Not unusual for a couple with their history of volatility, but this argument was different. This one escalated beyond words, beyond the usual pattern of verbal abuse that Lourdes had learned to endure. The argument became so heated that Lourdes made a decision that would seal her fate. She stopped the car and got out. Picture this moment. A young woman, probably still wearing her birthday outfit, standing on a dark street in the early hours of August 27th. Maybe she needed air. Maybe she was trying to de-escalate the situation by removing herself from the confined space of the car. Maybe she was just tired of being trapped with someone whose mood could turn violent without warning. Walker claimed he got into the driver's seat and told her to get back in, but Lourdes didn't comply. The confrontation that had started inside the car now spilled onto the street. And that's when an ordinary citizen became an unwilling witness to something that would haunt him forever. This man, whose name we don't know, whose face we've never seen, had stepped outside his home at 3:40 a.m. for what should have been a routine cigarette break. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe he was winding down from a late shift. Whatever brought him outside at that exact moment, it put him in position to witness the final chapter of Lord Keymolen's life. The screams hit him first, a woman's voice, desperate and terrified, calling for help in the darkness. He looked across the street and saw something that violated every assumption about how human beings should treat each other. Lourdes was lying in a bush, and Walker was standing over her, his fists connecting with her body again and again. This wasn't a momentary loss of control. This was sustained, deliberate violence. The witness watched in horror as Walker beat the woman who had spent her birthday believing he might actually love her. But Lourdes wasn't finished fighting. Somehow, despite the pain, despite the shock of being attacked by someone she trusted, she found the strength to stand up. She managed to get to her feet, probably thinking the worst was over, probably hoping she could still walk away from this nightmare. That's when Walker made a choice that transformed him from an abusive boyfriend into a cold-blooded killer. He walked to his 2001 Pontiac Grand Prix, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. The witness, still watching from across the street, probably couldn't process what he was seeing. People don't actually run over other people with cars. That's something that happens in movies, not on quiet residential streets in Kent, Washington. But Walker put the car in drive and accelerated directly toward her. The impact sent her body flying, but Walker wasn't done. He backed up and hit her again and again. The witness would later tell police that Walker struck Lourdes multiple times with his vehicle, each impact more devastating than the last. When Walker finally stopped, Lolita wasn't moving. He got out of the car, walked over to her broken body, and did something that revealed just how far removed he was from anything resembling human decency. What happened next would make even seasoned investigators question how someone could cross that line from violence into something far more disturbing. Walker stood over Lourdes' motionless body and did something that defied all logic, all human decency, all pretense that this had been an accident or a moment of lost control. He slapped her face, hard. The witness, still frozen in disbelief across the street, watched as Walker struck his girlfriend's unresponsive face repeatedly. Later, Walker would claim to investigators that he was trying to revive her, that these were desperate attempts to bring her back to consciousness. But medical examiners would tell a different story entirely. Then Walker made another decision that revealed the calculated nature of his actions. Instead of calling 911, instead of rushing her to the nearest hospital, instead of doing anything that might actually save her life, he dragged her lifeless body into his car. The witness had seen enough. He was armed, and as Walker prepared to flee the scene with Lourdes' body, this stranger made a split-second decision to try to stop him. He fired shots at Walker's tires as the Pontiac sped away, but it was too late. The image that would haunt this witness forever was Lourdes' legs hanging out of the car door as Walker drove into the darkness, her body partially dragged along the asphalt. Hours later, police discovered Lourdes' partially nude body behind a chiropractic clinic in Kent. Walker's car was found several feet away, abandoned. He had simply left her there like discarded trash and walked away. The autopsy results painted a picture of violence so extreme that even experienced investigators struggled to process it. She had suffered a shattered pelvis, multiple broken ribs, and a broken jaw. She had a black eye and bite marks on her face, injuries that the medical examiner determined had been inflicted while she was still alive and conscious. When confronted with this evidence, Walker maintained his story about trying to revive Lourdes. He insisted that the bite marks, the facial injuries, the broken bones were all the result of his frantic attempts to bring her back to life after what he claimed was an accidental collision. But here's what Walker couldn't explain away. If you're genuinely trying to save someone's life, you don't slap them unconscious, you don't bite their face, you don't break their jaw with your fists. And you certainly don't drag their body into your car and abandon them behind a business instead of rushing them to a hospital. The medical evidence told the real story. These weren't the injuries of someone trying to perform CPR or mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. These were the injuries of someone who continued to assault Lourdes even after running her over multiple times. Someone whose rage didn't end when she stopped moving. While investigators pieced together the physical evidence, her family was dealing with a different kind of devastation. Gabriel, her brother, found himself thrust into a role he never wanted, becoming the emotional anchor for a family shattered by unthinkable loss. "I'm the trunk of the tree," he would say later. "I'm holding it together for everybody right now." But even the strongest trees can only withstand so much before they break. Walker was arrested on August 27th, just hours after abandoning Lourdes' body behind that chiropractic clinic. He was booked into King County Jail and charged with first-degree murder, but the legal process that followed would test the Keymolen family's faith in justice for nearly 4 years. During those years, the family discovered things about Lourdes' relationship with Walker that she had kept hidden from them. Friends came forward with stories of physical abuse that went far beyond the verbal attacks her mother had witnessed. The pattern became clear. Lourdes had been protecting her family from the full truth, probably knowing that if they understood the extent of Walker's violence, they would have moved heaven and earth to get her away from him. "I almost feel like she tried to spare us because she knows the extent we would have went to protect her," Mike Smith, her ex-boyfriend and Maella's father, would reflect later. The weight of that realization, that Lourdes had suffered in silence to protect the people who loved her most, added another layer of anguish to their grief. Gabriel carried the heaviest burden during this time, while his mother Fabi struggled with waves of devastation that left her unable to function for days at a time, while Mailea grew from a toddler into a little girl who asked increasingly difficult questions about why mommy wasn't coming home. Gabriel became the foundation that kept everyone from completely falling apart. "We cry until we can't cry no more," he said during those long years of waiting. "We can't sleep. We just started eating, barely. We don't leave the house. We're just in shock. We're numb." Finally, in March 2024, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Walker's sentencing hearing brought both families face to face in a courtroom charged with emotion, pain, and years of suppressed rage. The hearing was marked by emotional outbursts that revealed just how deep the wounds ran on both sides. But it was Fabi's statement that cut through all the legal proceedings and laid bare the human cost of Walker's actions.
"I loved you at one time. I accepted you into my family. You promised me that you were going to be good to my daughter. You failed me. You failed as a man, a father, and a son."
Those words carried the weight of every family dinner where Walker had sat at their table, every birthday celebration where he had been welcomed as part of their circle, every moment when they had trusted him with the most precious thing in their world, their daughter's safety and happiness. Walker, perhaps recognizing that his years of denial and excuses had finally run out, offered what seemed like genuine remorse.
"I truly, sincerely apologize. And how you guys feel is validated, you feel me? So I just apologize. And no love is lost on my side. I love all you guys, and you guys deserve this moment."
"I truly, sincerely apologize," he said. "How you guys feel is validated. No love is lost on my side. I love all you guys, and you guys deserve this moment. But apologies, no matter how sincere, cannot resurrect the dead or heal the wounds left in their wake." Judge Averill Rothrock, who had presided over the case, called it one of the most egregious cases of domestic violence the court has seen. She sentenced Walker to 17 years in prison for felony murder, plus 5 months for unlawful possession of a firearm to be served concurrently. He would also face 3 years of community custody after his release. As Walker was handcuffed and led away, the courtroom fell silent. Justice had been served, but for the Keymolen family, the real sentence, life without Lourdes, would last forever. The gavel fell, Walker was led away in handcuffs, and suddenly the Keymolen family found themselves facing a question they hadn't fully prepared for. What happens after justice is served? For Mailea, now 5 years old, the concept of justice meant nothing. What mattered to her was that mommy still wasn't coming home, and no courtroom verdict could change that reality. For my niece, it's hard to see. She comes up and we only got pictures, Gabriel said. She says, I miss my mom. Those 4 simple words, I miss my mom, carried more weight than any legal testimony. They represented a lifetime of missed bedtime stories, birthday parties where mommy would never again light the candles, school plays where an empty seat would forever mark Lourdes' absence. But Leia's loss was just one ripple in a pond of devastation that extended far beyond the Keymolen family. The case had sent shockwaves through King County, where domestic violence statistics were already climbing to alarming heights. In 2020 alone, the year Lourdes was murdered, the county saw 11 domestic violence homicides and 2 murder-suicides, double the number from 2019. Prosecutors reported that pending felony domestic violence cases had increased by 70% compared to the previous year. Lourdes' death wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a growing epidemic that was claiming lives at an unprecedented rate. The eyewitness who had tried to save Lourdes by shooting at Walker's tires carried his own burden. He told Fabi that he would never get the sound of her daughter's screams out of his head. This stranger who had done everything he could to intervene now lived with the knowledge that his efforts hadn't been enough. Even Walker's own family grappled with the aftermath. His mother spoke during the sentencing about their house of horrors, claiming that Walker's relationship with his father had shaped the violence that ultimately exploded on that August night. She acknowledged that Cordante will have to forever live out the rest of his days knowing that it was at his hands the woman he will forever love lost her life. The tragedy had created a network of secondary victims, people whose lives were forever altered by witnessing, investigating, or simply learning about what happened to Lourdes. Police officers who worked the case, emergency responders who found her body, court personnel who processed the evidence, all carried pieces of her story with them. What do you think about the long-term impact of domestic violence on families and communities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and these conversations help us understand how to better support survivors and prevent future tragedies. The question that haunted everyone wasn't just how this happened, but how many other Lourdes were out there right now, trapped in relationships that could turn deadly without warning. The most haunting aspect of Lourdes' story isn't just what happened to her, it's how preventable it might have been if the warning signs had been recognized and acted upon earlier. Domestic violence experts who studied the case identified a chilling pattern that mirrors thousands of similar relationships across the country. Walker's behavior didn't escalate overnight from loving boyfriend to killer. The transformation happened gradually, through a series of red flags that, in hindsight, painted a clear roadmap to tragedy. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a domestic violence specialist who wasn't involved in the case but has studied similar patterns, explains abusers don't start with murder. They start by testing boundaries. A push here, a slap there, followed by elaborate apologies and promises to change. The victim becomes conditioned to accept escalating levels of violence as normal. The financial control was another warning sign. Walker had gradually taken over Lourdes' finances, making her dependent on him for basic necessities. This economic abuse is one of the most effective tools abusers use to trap their victims, making it nearly impossible for them to leave even when they recognize the danger. Perhaps most tragically, Lourdes had actually begun taking steps to protect herself in the weeks before her death. She had confided in a close friend about her fears and had even researched local domestic violence resources online. Her browser history, discovered during the investigation, showed searches for how to leave an abusive relationship safely and domestic violence shelters near me. But leaving an abusive relationship is statistically the most dangerous time for victims. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 75% of domestic violence homicides occur when the victim is attempting to leave or has recently left the relationship. Lourdes' decision to get out of the car that night might have been her attempt to create distance from Walker, but it inadvertently put her in the most vulnerable position possible. The tragedy is that help was available. King County has multiple domestic violence resources, including the Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233, which operates 24/7 and provides safety planning, counseling, and emergency shelter placement. The county also has specialized courts designed to handle domestic violence cases more effectively, and programs that help victims develop safety plans for leaving dangerous relationships. But these resources only work if victims know about them and feel safe enough to use them. Too often, the shame and fear that abusers deliberately cultivate prevent victims from reaching out until it's too late. If you or someone you know is showing signs of being in an abusive relationship, unexplained injuries, isolation from friends and family, fear of their partner's reactions, or making excuses for their partner's controlling behavior, please don't wait for the situation to escalate. The most important thing to remember is that leaving safely requires planning, support, and often professional guidance. Lourdes' story reminds us that love should never hurt, and that recognizing the warning signs early can literally save lives. The Keymolen family has channeled their grief into action, partnering with domestic violence organizations to share Lourdes' story at community events and high schools. They've discovered that young people, especially those in their first serious relationships, often don't recognize controlling behavior as abuse until it's pointed out to them. Lourdes would want her story to save somebody else, Fabi explains. She was always trying to help people, always putting others first. If talking about what happened to her can prevent another family from going through this nightmare, then maybe some good can come from all this pain. Perhaps most importantly, Lourdes' story has sparked conversations in communities where domestic violence was previously whispered about behind closed doors. Her case has given other survivors permission to speak up, to seek help, to believe that they deserve better than living in fear.